This week, I've never done this before, but this week I posted on the sign out in front. In 30 years of ministry, I've never done that before, to post what I'm going to share on Sunday morning. And I want to tell you that what I posted out there is closing the door to your enemies. That is the message for today. But I must confess to you that when I started preparing for that message, that I was headed a totally different direction than where we're going this morning. But I think that's a good thing, because God is going to insert in our lives what He wants us to receive today. Many of you were not born when World War II was going on, when it was being fought. Let me just see the hands of anybody that remembers was alive during World War II. Can I see your hands if you were alive? Not very many. How many of you were born after World War II? Most of us, okay. Way after, older. World War II was fought between basically the nation of Japan, Italy, and Germany. Those were called the Axis powers, and then there were the Allied powers. United States, Great Britain, Canada, Australia. And so there was a great division in the world between two completely different philosophies and attitudes about government. And when the war broke out, the United States, most of you know of Pearl Harbor, and a great many of our ships and our fleet were sunk there in Pearl Harbor, and that was actually the catalyst that triggered our entry into World War II, December 7th, 1941. And for the first 18 months to 24 months, the United States was involved in the battle, but it did not look good, because Japan and her allies with Germany and Italy were just advancing throughout the world. There was a great fear that they were literally going to control the world, to destroy anything that stood in their way. And it was during that time that there was a lot of fear in America. There was a lot of rationing. There was a lot. You couldn't buy tires. You couldn't buy sugar. You had to have stamps to buy certain things. Didn't matter how much money you had. They were not building new cars, because all of the effort was going into building the war machine to defeat the Axis powers. In 1944, the United States, along with its allies, launched what became known as the D-Day invasion. And they amassed every floating vessel, every troop carrier, every ship that they could amass, and they crossed the English Channel and landed on the beaches of Normandy in an attempt to drive the Axis powers back. There was an interesting thing that happened, because there was a lot of question about where the Allied powers were going to invade, and they thought they'd do it here or somewhere else. But what happened is that on that attack on D-Day, the Axis, the Germans and the Italians, made a very serious mistake. The mistake they made was to allow the Allies to land on the beachhead. Their philosophy was to allow them to land on the beachhead and to destroy them there. But the moment that the Allies landed on the beachhead, it really was a done deal. Now, if I could go on and tell you that it took several more months, but because of the beachhead and the continual ability to reinforce the troops, that the Allies went through Europe and defeated the European enemy. But there was still another enemy in the Pacific. It was the Japanese forces. And as we talk about these forces, I want to make it very clear that it's not necessarily the people or the personality of the people. It is the government that caused these things to happen, as it is in many cases the people. You know, it's been said that there were German mothers praying for their sons on the front line, while American mothers were praying for their sons on the front line as well. Same God. But the same thing took place in the Pacific, because the islands were controlled by the Japanese. And again, their philosophy This was a very flawed philosophy, because their philosophy was, we will allow them to land on the beachhead, and then we will destroy them on the beachhead. And one island after another, the foothold, the stronghold, the beachhead that was developed enabled the Allies to defeat their enemy. It was almost every time, every invasion. They were not stopped in the sea. They were not stopped before they got to the beachhead. In every case, if they were able to get to the beach and develop an inroad, a beachhead, if you will, then ultimately it was a done deal. That island would fall to the Allies, and the Japanese forces would be destroyed. So what I want to share with you for just a moment this morning is that the same thing is true in the spirit realm. Paul said in the book of Ephesians, he said, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. And he goes on to tell us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. In other words, people are not the real issue in our lives. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and the rulers of darkness in high places, in heavenly. There are spiritual forces that are arrayed against any person who has any inkling or inclination toward the things of God. And there are forces that come into your life. And the way they come, folks, whether you know it or not, is they do not come and say, this is the devil speaking. They come through intellect. They come through temptation. They come through opportunities for you to veer away from, or to maybe even offer just a little bit of compromise with those forces of darkness, with those spiritual forces. And the moment you do that, what has happened is you have allowed the enemy to develop a beachhead into your life. You cannot, let me just say, you cannot allow the enemy to land on your beach, on your island, in your life, and then expect that just because you recognize who he is now, that you're going to be able to just easily defeat him. So the first step in closing the door to the enemy is to never allow him to get there. Say it again. The first step in closing the door to your enemy is never allow him to get there. Now, what the enemy always does, and I was really researching over in the Old Testament, one of the things that the enemy will always do is he will always attempt to show you the blueprint without considering God. When Goliath stood before David, he said, I'm going to take you today and feed you to the birds. And he never said anything about God, except David did not come to Goliath with his natural physical strength and ability. He said, you come to me with sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord. When the forces of Nineveh, when they came against the city of Jerusalem, and Hezekiah was there, and he was confronted with this great army, and they intimidated him. They said, all the other gods of all the other nations have not been able to deliver them, and who is your God? And then they actually blasphemed when they said, Jehovah told us to come down here and to destroy this city. And many times the enemy will try to come to you with a frontal attack, and he will threaten you, and he will try to leave God out of your life. And I want to tell you this morning, if you examine the attack that comes against you without God's input, you're going to see yourself as a defeated foe. But I have good news for you today, because God said, Jesus said, I will never leave you or forsake you, even to the end of the age. He also said that there is no temptation taken you. Paul said this, but such as is common to man, and God will not allow you to be tempted above that which you're able, but will with the temptation provide a way of escape. Now, I've got some things that I want to show you about how the enemy gets a beachfront or a stronghold in our life. But the first thing that we have to decide today, if God said it,